So joining me now is Margaret Cho. Not a big deal, just 5 Grammy Award nominations, 1 Emmy nomination. Doing a comedy tour called Fresh Off The BLOAT, which is, on name alone, is hilarious. And the Margaret Cho podcast, and you were on Law and Order SVU, and obviously the legendary All-American Girl, the sitcom from back in the day that started so many things. In fact, I didn't know, I just saw in your bio, even though I watched the first episode of Fresh Off the Boat, that they featured you, the All-American Girl, in the show. They were watching it?
Yeah, they were watching it, which because the show is actually set in the 90s, so they're actually watching it. And then, because our show, when I was doing All-American Girl, was for a lot of Asian Americans, was the first time they saw another Asian American on television. So even though the show didn't last for very long, it was very important for a lot of Asian Americans, a lot of Americans in general, but especially for Asian Americans to see that. So it was important for all of us.
Yeah, I remember, well, we were just talking about it off air, that my friends and I, there was a lot of Asians that I grew up with. When we saw that show come on, we're like, oh my God, it's a show about Asians.
Yes.
Like, in a sense, we were finally on TV.
Yes.
And so that was groundbreaking and awesome and made a huge difference.
Yes, representation really matters, and you really see it, and when you, it really reverberates, and it really makes a difference, and it's incredibly empowering. So I'm grateful for a show like Fresh Off the Boat and its longevity now, and so now we'll have more and more. Yeah,
absolutely. Now you're known for your raw honesty, which we're going to get to in a second, and about the tour too. But another thing I didn't know about back in the day was that Tarantino was in All-American Girl.
Yes.
And I didn't know you guys dated back then. I had no idea.
Well, he and I are big film fans, and we spent a lot of time together because he was a video store clerk back in the day, and he had actually bought out the store. So we had about 8,000 movies to get through together that we watched. All of these movies. I mean, that was the crux of our relationship, was watching movie after movie. I mean, it was really great times. And we learned a lot about movies. We learned a lot about just what we wanted to do with our lives. And he's a great guy, and he was on our show. And you really see how Hollywood is. I was with him in between Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, and you saw how much power somebody like that wields in Hollywood. I've never seen anything like it. How
like
people
how? Well, like what
fall
happens?
down, fall at your feet. Just will do anything for you. You go into a restaurant and he would walk in, and we would walk in together, and people would just scurry around, just trying to get you the best table, trying to get you anything you wanted, and that kind of power to me was just foreign because I'd never seen it. But he was growing to become used to it, because that's what everybody was doing. And it was really interesting. It was a very interesting display of privilege and power in Hollywood, and how the balance was changing, and how artistry was becoming the new kind of currency.
Yeah, I know a guy who dated Sarah Silverman, and he said, look, it kind of warps your sense of reality, because whenever you're in a restaurant, you feel like everyone in the room is constantly looking at you, which is relatively true, right?
Yes.
So how did that feel? Was that trippy? Was it overall good, or was it overall bad? Because that could feel kind of oppressive to have everyone looking at you under a microscope nonstop.
I guess it was at that time. I mean, we were kind of I don't know. We were sort of. I don't know. We were kind of like the geekiest, most perfect couple. I mean, we're sort of like the Comic-Con Brangelina, because it was me and him. That's the perfect geeky combination. The geek dream, basically.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like we were riding that sort of wave of non-conventional, conventional, geeky, perfect.
Right. So your demo is our audio technician, Bart, okay?
Yes.
So Bart's a huge film buff, huge Tarantino fan.
Awesome.
And so when you said you watched 8,000 movies with Tarantino,
we loved
Bart nearly had a heart attack.
The best.
He's like, oh my God.
We would love a movie so hard we would have to rewind it and watch it again. So that happened with Mandingo, it happened with Fat City. It happened with quite a few movies. We would actually have to just rewind it and watch it again. And this is on VHS or PAL sometimes, because we had both formats, those players. So yeah, it was quite a paradise.
That's awesome. Okay, now in your tour, usual raw honesty from Margaret Cho as always.
Well,
right?
yes.
So you described yourself as coming back from the river Styx. So okay, why? What happened?
Well, I was going along on a very dark path in my life. I think with comedy in particular, there's a kind of thing where comedians, we really burn out pretty quickly. And I was doing a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs, and going about a very difficult place in my lifetime, and in a destructive relationship with somebody I didn't want to be with. And I joke about it in my acts, like I was in a relationship I didn't want to be in, and I was doing a lot of drugs because I was trying to break up with him by dying. And it's actually really hard to do that.
Okay, well, thank God.
And so I cleaned my act up, cleaned my life up, and so now I'm back to it. But I'm back to doing comedy about it, which is great. It's a good time to do comedy, especially political comedy, because everything's changing. And now everything really is changing, and so you're minute to minute really trying to figure out how we're gonna actually play this, what's gonna actually happen. I finally realized, I think we're actually gonna impeach. I really think it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, you were worried about it, right?
I was worried, are we just gonna dance around this and it's not gonna? Now I actually think, it's gonna happen now. I really didn't think it was going to, but now I think it is, and so now I'm back on it. I'm like, now I'm here. I'm here for it.
Okay, good.
Very
I'm glad you're here for it.
Very excited.
So look, this is what do you make of Trump? So I know the easy answer is, it makes comics' lives easier. But it's also psychologically wearing.
Yeah.
I wonder what your overall take on it is.
Well, it's worn us all down. I think that it's been terrible for the planet. It's actually been terrible for the world. It's actually made a mockery of what's actually a very important office, and it's an actually very important state. It's an important position of power to be in, and it's made something that is actually kind of a great thing to be, something really dumb. And so now we've got to re-legitimize that position somehow, reconfigure the office of presidency. How do we make that a legit thing again?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way of putting it. We've turned the presidency into a joke.
Yeah.
And so it'd be nice if that was the one place that was not a joke.
Yeah, so now we have to refigure how we can do that. I feel like the person that could probably do that would be Bernie Sanders. He's somebody that I really have enjoyed for a long time. I endorsed him first time around. I would definitely do it again. Also, I love Elizabeth Warren. I think she's great. I don't care. I'm a little bit of that thing of I don't care who it is as long as it's not Trump. But I also think that we have the position of we can get somebody in there that we really do want.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So it feels like comedy is one place where you can be as political as you want.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
I think so. I feel like there can be a little fatigue with maybe actors. I think that people can get, there seems to be a little bit of early 2000s fatigue around certain issues. People would get tired around actors talking about Tibet because they couldn't understand. I think because actors never fully explained why they were on certain issues. People that were very liberal diehards, whether it was Richard Gere or Susan Sarandon, or they wouldn't fully explain. They didn't have the time or the language to explain why they were on these issues, and so you would get liberal fatigue around it. Whereas comedians can fully say, well, this is what it is, and so get behind things that make people understand.
Yeah, I think that of all the different groups, we were talking earlier in the show about 44 different billionaires are giving money to Joe Biden, right? Of all the wealthy groups, the one demographic that is the most progressive appears to be actors, not movie executives. That's a totally different category.
Yeah, it's a totally different thing.
Right, but actors actually are progressive, even if they're incredibly wealthy. It appears on average. So. Bless their hearts for that. Okay, but now back to the stand-up. You call it the sickest stand-up you've ever done. Why?
I think so. I think because it's when you get as close to death as I have, when you feel like there's nothing left to lose, then you can really kind of play around with that, and then you're sort of in a place, like for me as an older woman, I think like at that time too, like I got into this Ajumma stage, and I think that like Ajumma is an older Korean woman where we're at the height of our powers because everybody's terrified of us. So that's the best place to be.
Okay, so how close were you to death?
Well, I mean, it's like when you're drinking that much and doing as many drugs as I was, then you're just pretty much playing around with like, am I gonna wake up tomorrow? You don't really know. And so that kind of thing of like, I'm kind of living on borrowed time now. So I feel like, okay, well, I'm really lucky to be alive. And so like, let's just make the most of it. And now comedy is sort of my one place where I can kind of be as outrageous and as wild as I can be. So this is my last high that I get.
Yeah, and so there's, I think, something wonderfully liberating about Nothing Left to Lose, which is pretty much describes my economic condition for my life. But one of the troubles is whether you can keep that, right?
Yeah.
Like, can you? Because like you get to that certain point, then you feel a little liberated. But as life goes on, do you still hold on to that attitude of I don't care, I got nothing left to lose. Let's have fun.
Like that's the thing is like how can we gamble everything and keep on winning and like not lose everything? Like to me, like okay, how do I keep on doing this without getting canceled? That's like everybody's afraid of getting canceled. Like we have cancel culture, and then you see somebody like Dave Chappelle's like so good at doing it without getting canceled. So maybe there's a way to do it. But then I was like, well, I think I was canceled before everybody else. My show got canceled in 1994, so I think I'm safe.
So maybe that was the original cancel culture.
I was originally canceled like really early on, so I was immunized first.
Yeah. So what do you make of that? Because see, you're in an interesting situation because you're very progressive, right? And very honest and raw about it, but not a huge fan of the cancel culture. So how do you balance those things?
Well, I think it's really about trying to figure out where your compassion is, because I think cancellation kind of comes where your compassion is lacking. Cancellation kind of comes if you're lacking and you're insistent on your own homophobia, or you're insistent on your own cisgender privilege, or you're insistent on your own racism. So therein lies the problem. So because I'm also queer, because I'm also a woman, because I'm also a woman of color, there's certain inherent things that maybe keep me away from those biases, possibly. So I don't know where privilege comes in. Maybe my queerness prevents me from that privilege, but I don't know yet,
Yeah.
So I'm still trying to see, I'm still trying to test where that lies. But I'm always trying to question it and trying to figure that out within myself, where that privilege is, and trying to combat it. So maybe, I'll find it, but I'm actively trying to question it, actively trying to combat it within myself. So trying to contain it and trying to remain intersectional and teachable within.
So well, that was really smart. Okay, so let me see if I kept up with it. So Margaret, you call yourself queer.
Yes.
So for example, let's start with that. What does that mean to you?
Well, I have relationships with women, with transgendered people, with people who identify as gender fluid, with people who identify as transgender, with people who identify in different gender identifications that are not necessarily male or female. So their identifications of gender do not denote my attraction to them. And that's something that I've always been. So my queerness is definitely something that has sort of always been a part of my sexuality. And so gender fluidity has kind of grown up around my queerness, and so I feel like I've kind of ushered in a lot of that, which feels really good, and it feels empowering that now this generation of non-binary people have kind of grown up around this sexuality that I've always felt.
So look, partly because I'm curious, partly because I want people to get comfortable with it, I want to explore that a little bit more. So when you were younger, to what degree did you recognize that you were attracted to men, women, transgender people, non-binary, etc. I don't think we even had that language. I think we were about the same age when we were growing up, right? But did you know when you were in high school that you were attracted to that whole range?
Yeah, and that we didn't really even have language to sort of address it. So we would talk about it in terms like stone butch was a term that would come up a lot, or butch, or femme, or different kinds of terms within the lesbian community that would come up around identity and how we identified with ourselves. And sometimes there was no identity, and sometimes there was no words around it, but we would just understand. And even being sort of asexual too, that was part of it. So there was a lot of understanding of sexuality within my community that had no words that I got. That it was like I grokked it, like it was kind of like, oh, I totally get this. Like this is like part of my tribe. And so now there's many more terms to kind of identify us where they didn't really exist before. So it's really cool to see that.
Yeah, that is really interesting evolution, and you kind of lived it in a sense. Now you had an extra aspect to that, and I coming from an immigrant background, and Turks are kind of Asian, right?
Yeah.
And grew up with a lot of Asians. I think I could say it was probably more difficult growing up Asian, being honest about that background. Is my guess, knowing the experiences that I've had and others have had.
Right.
Is that true in your case?
Yes, because there's a kind of there's a real puritanical streak around Asians, around Koreans in particular, around gayness, around queerness, which my family in particular really rejected. So my family were very adamant about having a gay business and creating this like little oasis within the Korean community to have a gay bookstore and court like the gay community in their like business. So that's sort of like the way that my family was very different.
Wow, that is interesting.
So that's the one part of my family that was very unique, is that they really set out to be an ally to the gay community where the rest of the Korean community was not. So that's where I was really lucky there.
Did the other family members though, and friends, etc., did they, once you, especially because when you became a comic and you're saying these wonderful, outrageous things, were they like, oh my God, your daughter, what is she doing?
Well, they were just, I think they were already kind of like afraid of our family anyway, because we were just so like artistic that they were just sort of, I think they let us alone. They let us be artistic on our own. And they sort of expected that from us, I guess.
I got you. But despite the fact that you're queer, have you gotten in trouble from others in the community for the jokes that you've made?
Probably. I mean, probably. I think that it's definitely something that is, it's confronting. It's confronting to talk about like sexuality in the Korean context, because Koreans are so like kind of protective of that. They're so like kind of puritanical about that kind of stuff, and so it can be very like shocking for them. For my family, often the gay stuff is really okay with them. What they have a problem with is bisexuality. That's where they don't understand.
Oh, fascinating. Why?
Because they understand gay and they understand straight, but they don't understand duality. Like that's really confusing. You have to be one thing and you have to be the other, but you can't be both. Right. That's really off. Like you can't have everything.
But there's the other side of it. Like, so you seem to say something positive about Dave Chappelle, and a lot of people are really pissed at Dave Chappelle.
Yeah.
So how do you handle that?
Well, to me, I think that what Dave is Dave is a true comedian, and comedians, what they are is they want to challenge the status quo. That's what comedy is all about. It's challenging all that is said, everything that is mentioned. What comedy is to be the true iconoclast, is to stand up against what's said, and that's really what the true nature of comedy is.
Okay, one more thing about something that's in your stand-up again with this challenges that you had. So how did you get past it? So what was a turning point for drugs, addiction, alcohol, etc., where you were like, no, that's it, I'm turning around?
Well, I think that like for me, it's really, it's really just do this or die. And I really do enjoy comedy. I really do enjoy laughter. I do enjoy life. Like I think that it's really fun, and I would like to continue doing this. You know, death is an easy enough choice to make, and so I can do that anytime. But you know, you don't get to do shows every single day, so I love that.
Yeah. So by the way, you got to check out the Fresh Off the Bloat comedy tour, Brea, California, January 10th and 11th. But just go to margaretcho.com/tour. It's been going for almost 2 years now,
yes.
right? Yeah, and then you also have a podcast, the Margaret Cho podcast. So what happens on the podcast?
It's really fun, and it's just like getting down and talking very much like, you know, raw, dirty, crazy fun, and lots of great people, like Quentin Tarantino, like Jonathan Van Ness, like lots of fun folks and people who I love, and we have a good time.
All right, awesome. And back to touring. So what's the best part of touring? What's the worst part?
I think the best part is seeing the world. And the worst part is having to travel everywhere. It's a very tiring thing, but then you get to see everything. So it's a lot, but I love it.
Yeah, and you were also in Masked Singer you recently.
Yes.
Yeah. So why'd you do Masked Singer?
Well, I love singing, and I used to be a Hello Kitty, so I'm.
Oh, really?
I'm very familiar with the fursuit life.
So
I
are you part of the furry community?
I didn't know if I would actually identify as a furry, but I've been inside of a fursuit more times than people would ever really think that I was. I mean,
if
I've
you
done
ask
it.
me, are you surprised if Margaret Cho was in a furry costume more than you managed? But no,
I've done it a lot. I've done it a lot. It's very hot in there.
I imagine. I see that as the biggest downside. All right, everybody check out Fresh Off the Bloat and Margaret Cho podcast. Margaret, you're awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.